Your Lake Fork guide. Hey, tonight we're going to be talking to you. It's going to be kind of a live Guides Network episode, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions, so I wanted to do this one live. We're going to talk about how the moon affects your decisions about how and when and where to fish throughout the springtime here at Lake Fork when you're bass fishing. It's such an important factor. There's so many different aspects day to day that the moon brings in, and we're going to break those down super in depth tonight. We're going to talk about them at length. So as you guys get here, do me a favor, drop me a comment, let me know who I'm talking to. Hey, if you enjoy these in-depth instructionals and you like the live version, hit that thumbs up for me. If you haven't already subscribed, I sure would appreciate it if you could. Also, share this. This is going to be some, well, I think it's going to be good information. We're definitely going to have an in-depth conversation. It's going to be an open conversation. It's going to be kind of a thesis of mine that I'm still working on, still in motion. But share this, man. Get this out there to everybody so we can get more people watching it, more people involved. And maybe, just maybe, we'll get some more insight and into what we're talking about. And maybe a different perspective can help us learn more, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Yeah, I got a little board. DJ Shack in the building. Check this out. Y'all see how there's like multiple, look at this. Woo! Yep. I ain't had this phone for 2 months and I've already cracked the screen and I've got a little crack on the camera lens. So now you get to deal with it looks like I have some type of TikTok filter on this sucker or something. It's kind of cool looking, huh? We are going to get into the moon phases here in just a minute. I'm trying to let a few people get gathered up in here. We'll say some hellos to the early risers. We got Tony Perkins, Seabach, Zach Pine, Andrew Alphabet, DJ Shack, Craig Honeycutt, Tony Maynard, Zane Selman, John Higginbotham, Super Dave, Brad Lamar, Andrew Lorraine, 6 Mile, JC, John Sherrod, Jared Carson, and many more. If I didn't call your name, I apologize. I do appreciate y'all joining us, as always. John Sherrod says he feels like he's been drinking too much beer already because of this. It's kind of cool. I kind of dig it. If I sit right here, it's almost normal. It just looks a little hazy. If I do this, it gets a little trippy. So that's right. We do have the red cup of gaining knowledge. The red cup of knowledge is with us tonight. We're gonna break it down, but we're gonna have a little help from the brown water in the red cup. That's for sure. Cheers, y'all. Welcome back to the Guys Network. Let's get it. All right, so what are we talking about with moon phases? When we're talking about moon phases, it influences fish throughout the year. It influences all of nature throughout the year. There are peak activity hours. There are monthly movements that are dictated by the moon throughout all of nature. And every animal relates to it a little differently. But in particular with bass, it is such a huge thing to be aware of in the springtime when we're talking about spawning cycles for bass. They definitely, I'm not saying every fish moves in on a moon cycle. With everything that I say tonight, guys, I want you to kind of keep this in perspective. There is no absolutes. Fish are really dumb creatures with really small brains, and they do crazy stuff all the time for no reason. And they live in a world that we don't fully understand, living under the water like they do. So that being said, everything I say tonight, there's some flexibility on it, right? Like there's going to be some outliers to what I'm telling you. What I'm going to express to you guys tonight, what I'm going to talk about, is my point of view from being fortunate enough over the last 5 years to have a ton of experience on the water. I'm a very adamant sight fisherman, so I have to stay in tune with kind of when those fish are spawning, and I get to see when they're the most aggressive, when they're the least aggressive, when the most of them are in, and when the most of them are out throughout each spawning cycle each year. And we're always learning. And one thing that I love is every time the Bassmaster Elite Series or the Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour comes to Lake Fork, man, I always learn something. Like, for sure, I always learn when those guys are here. And this year was no different. And it's springtime. I mean, you think being a guide here as long as I have it pretty dialed in. But you always learn something. And what I really learned, it had a lot to do with the moon cycle. And ever since that tournament, I've been wanting to do this video. I've been thinking about doing this video. And I thought there'd be no better way than to do it live so that you guys, as you have questions, I can hopefully answer as many of them as possible. So let's just get into it. Why not, right? Let's just dig on in to this sack. Now, I'm going to try to keep the bottom of this board off the screen for now. Okay, I know this is going to be backwards. I apologize. Bear with me. What I have here is a 2-week calendar. I got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The reason I did that is because our full moon to new moon cycle basically goes every 2 weeks. I think it's 15 days, but it's basically every 2 weeks. So if I have a full moon right here, we'll just put an F. If I have a full moon right here on Sunday, well, I'm going to have a new moon over there on the 2 weeks from then Saturday, right? So that's kind of how that works. So in between, and the reason I drill these days that I'm going to show you. Here's how this works in my opinion with fish. They arrive to spawn right here on the day of the moon or right here, whether it's full or new. The only difference between full and new that I really see is that if all weather conditions are the same, water temps are basically the same, you'll get a higher number of fish that move in on a full moon than you will on a new moon. But there's definitely still a significant wave that pulls in on a new moon. What I see, or my opinion, is they get here on a full moon and the males immediately go to getting on beds on that day and really on the day after. So you'll have males starting to lock in the 2 days after the full moon and even the day of the full moon. But that third day, fourth day, fifth day, that's when you seem to get, for me, the most amount of females, about 3 days after, 4 or 5 days after, even 6 days after at times. It's when you get the most amount of females locking in. Now, some females are going to come in here the day after and lock in. Some females are going to lock in 2 days after. But the majority of them will lock in 3 to 5 days after the moon cycle. Now, once they've locked in, some of them are only going to be there for a day. Some of them are not even there for a full day. Some of these females will stay for several days. The males will certainly stay sometimes for 2 to 3 weeks. At times, a male will stay on a bed, depending on how much light penetration, how long the eggs take to hatch, all that good stuff. But the general rule of thumb is, once you get to the halfway point, you're losing fish on beds. It's like new fish on beds, a few fish on beds, and then as we get away from that, once we reach kind of that 5th and 6th day after, now we're going to start less. Your bed fish are going to go from up here, and you're going to go less and less and less and less until you basically hit the bottom right before the new moon or the next moon cycle. This could be a new and this could be a full. You can switch those two. So you can kind of see what happens is they show up on the full moon. We'll just do this right here. This will be good. They show up on the full moon, and it kind of goes like this. It starts about right here on the full moon, and it just goes up gradually, 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 levels off. And that's kind of the arc of how I see bedfish coming in. Now, I think there's a little bit of misconception in bass fishing in general over the years. Everybody thinks the first day or two after the moon cycle, that's when you're going to have the most fish on beds. In my experience, that's not true. I think people have always assumed, and I've been kind of under this understanding over the years myself, that fish pull into the pockets leading up to the full moon, and then when the full moon hits, bam, they're on beds. That's not really how I've seen it go down. In other lakes, maybe they lock in faster. Lake Fork does have an extreme amount of pressure. There's a lot of outside human influence on these fish on Lake Fork that could cause that to be why they cycle this way. So that's kind of your general consensus. Full moon, 3 days after, man, you're going to kind of hit the peak. 5, 6 days after, you're going to start to dwindle down after that, and then it's going to fall off pretty quick. Now, the reason I drew this graph is because if bass aren't on beds this time of year, there's two things that go on from about March through May every year. And this year, it's going to be all the way through the end of May and even on into June. There's two different things that really go on in a big way, and that's going to be shallow staging fish that are feeding in pre- and post-spawn situations, and spawning fish that are in the backs of pockets doing their spawning thing. The higher this arc is, the less fish that will be out there staging. At the bottoms of this arc, okay, that's where the most fish are going to be staging and feeding on the shallow staging areas. Shell bed points, shallow points, clay points, hard points. Just the shallow feeding grounds out on the main lake or out at the mouth of the creek, stuff like that. You're going to have more fish out doing that at the lower times of this graph, and you'll have more fish spawning at the higher times. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. If we look at the most recent Bassmaster Elite Series tournament, here we go. The days of the week don't correlate, but this is how that worked out. Practice, 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 day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. I'm sorry, I drew that wrong. 1 second. Let me fix that real quick. I was 1 day off on that. Okay, this is how it worked out. The only difference was this was a full, and this was a new. So for the Elite Series, you had practice, 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 day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. The day after was a full moon. Now, if you look at this graph, that maps out exactly to what we saw with the Elite Series event. If you watch the practice reports, everybody was talking, me included, talking about sight fishing. Well, no wonder we were talking about sight fishing. Look what had been going on. Look at what cycle we were in. I mean, yeah, we were looking at sight fishing. Then on day 1, there was quite a bit of sight fishing going on. Now, there were some staging guys that got by. Day 2, there were some staging guys that got by, but we had funny weather that kind of messed about it for everybody on day 2. Day 3, the staging guys really took over. The guys fishing staging fish really kind of took over the event on day 3. And by day 4, we all saw what happened. Lee Livesey catches 42 pounds. That's one of the all-time record days on staging fish. Patrick Walters catches 30-something pounds on staging fish. Zaldane was 1 landed fish short of a 30-pound bag on staging fish. That bite really, as that tournament went on, the staging fish bite really took over. But that's where we were in this cycle. So after analyzing what happened in the Elite Series event, and I was fortunate enough to get to pay a lot of attention to what happened, watch a lot of live coverage, spent some time on the water, watching, talk, as you guys saw in the video, got to talk to a lot of guys behind the scenes at the weigh-in. After watching that Elite Series event and really observing what happened, and combining that with my knowledge of kind of how, I for a long time thought that I knew that the sight fishing peaked several days after the moon, not right after it like most people thought. But combining what I've seen with what I saw those guys do, that's how I come up with this little thesis right here. This moon changes everything in the springtime, and it's a 2-week cycle. You will be much more consistent and have much more chance at a successful day if you're reading the moon phases and paying attention to this cycle and going by this cycle right here, in my opinion. So, that's an explanation of how the fish relate to the moon as far as spawning cycles go. And there's, like we've said, there's a 2-way go on Lake Fork. You can fish for staging fish, and you can fish for spawning fish. And the reason that I've dove in so much and I spent so much time dwelling on this and thinking about it is because cheers, y'all. Is because for years you had guys that were one or the other. And I fell more into the sight fishing category. I would just sight fish every day. And there's always some up. Once you get kind of into the good sight fishing season, there's always some that you can go sight fish. And Lake Fork has big enough male bass that you can go back there and pick some males off and scrape together a good day, most days sight fishing. Then there's guys that, you know, like the late great Mark Pack, he wasn't going sight fishing. Like, you know, he's going staging fish, man. That's what he wants to do. That's what he's going to do. You know, Lee Livesey, that just won the Elite Series, he wanted no part of sight fishing in that tournament. He wanted to do the staging fish deal, and he stayed with it. And for years, what I've seen on Lake Fork is you have guides and locals that fish all the time that do one or the other. They just go with what they feel more confident in, what they're more comfortable doing, what they want to do. And guys will hit those staging fish, and boy, when we're in these low parts on this graph, when we're here and we're here, those guys fishing staging fish, whack them. But right in here, those guys will have some off days and struggle. And this is always the response you get. Man, we swinging for the fences. We're out here where those big ones come to feed. Sometimes you're going to miss them. Yeah, if they're all moving in, if a bunch of them move into spawn and there's less fish out there, you're right, you are going to miss them. Your chances of missing them are going to increase. Then the sight fishing guys would whack them here, and then we have to grind out males and not catch as good a fish in the down times. What I want to do, what I want to become, is a guy that can go back and forth in between and know when to go back and forth in between. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. And this is something that I'm still by no means am I like really good at this, because that sight fishing calls my name too much, honestly. But I haven't got it dialed in just yet. But this, to me, the guys that can figure this out and can do both, can sight fish, can catch spawning bass, and catch staging bass effectively, that's going to be the guy that's the most consistent, outstanding fisherman on Lake Fork throughout the springtime, year after year. He's going to be able to lock it down, because no matter what the fish are doing, he's going to have knowledge of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and he's going to be so consistent that he's just going to be better than everybody else. And that's what I want to try to become. So that's why I'm working on this little thesis, and I'm trying to put it together and understand it. And like we always do here, I want you guys to learn with me. So we're putting it out there. But if you can be that guy that's good at catching spawning fish for, 3, 5, 6 days in here, and then also be that guy that's good at catching staging fish for 6 or 7 days on either side of it, you can have one hell of a time in the spring. Because these fish aren't hard, like they're about as easy to catch as they ever get. They're up there defending a bed. They're dumb. They let you look at them and they still bite. They get out staging. They're either pre-spawn about to go on a bed, or they're post-spawn starving to death. They're feeding. When you're catching them on those staging areas, they're there just to feed. That's the only reason they're there. So when you run across them, you catch them pretty easy. Like, if you can have that dialed in consistently, holy cow, the damage you can do throughout a spring cycle, whew, it can be crazy. So there it is. That's the 2-week moon cycle. It's actually a 15-day, but 2-week moon cycle theory that I have come up with right here. Now, we just had a new moon 2 days ago. So right now, for the next few days, you should target spawning fish. This is the peak time. Tomorrow starts the peak time for the next few days to target spawning bass. As we get on towards the later part, like Sunday, maybe Saturday, but Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, that's when you're going to want to go back to the staging fish. You're going to be in between cycles at that point. That's how you do that. You just got to pay attention to those moon cycles and when they're coming. So, pretty interesting stuff. Y'all let me know what y'all thought. I found it extremely interesting. The more that I dove into it and thought about it, what do you guys think? Cody May says he went to Hallbrook today for fun, and a lot of fish still have eggs. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of fish still have eggs in all the lakes around here pretty much. There is one more aspect to the moon cycle that you got to pay attention to, and it's more important for the staging deal than it is for the spawning deal. Eric, I'll get onto that in just a minute. Got a good question here. A-Red Fishing says, so when you're saying targeting staging fish, you mean like move off of a spawning flat into the channel? Not necessarily into the channel. Like, a lot of our staging fish are caught on really shallow points that are kind of outside the spawning areas. But yeah, get out of the backs of pockets and go look for staging points, shallow feeding tables, shell beds, stuff like that. So the other aspect that the moon brings in is the daily aspect of peak times of activity and lull times of activity. Now, you can look up lunar tables and they'll give you this. They'll give you the peak times of activity. Okay. For spawning fish, it doesn't seem to be as adamant about when they're the most locked on or anything like that. The sun has a lot to do with when the spawning fish are the easiest to catch and when they lock on, in my personal opinion. But for the staging fish especially, there is going to be a correlation to this peak activity. Of course, you're going to have your early morning first light feeding hour. That's going to happen. You're going to have your low light at the end of the day feeding time. But throughout the middle of the day, okay, there's going to be times when those fish pick up activity levels and really feed. Show you how that works. So this bottom graph, and again, I know it's backwards, but I'll explain it to you. So this is the world, and you're sitting on top of the world. That's where you're located. When the moon is overhead or underfoot, that's a P for prime. That's the prime feeding time when the moon is directly overhead or directly underfoot. When the moon is directly to your side, be it east or west, that's your secondary best time. There's not as much activity as during the prime, but it's the second best time of the day is to the sides. These quartering times, when the moon is at a quarter away from you, whether it's between overhead and east or underfoot and east or whatever it's between, I'll put some interesting things here for you guys. Let's see. This one says it sucks. This one says go eat lunch. That one says nap time, and that one says 5 o'clock somewhere. Because if you're fishing for staging fish and you're not in one of the low light hours to kind of pick up the activity level, and you're in one of these quartering, where the moon's quartering away from you, you might as well just forget it. Like, there's just not a lot of activity in my experience during those quartering hours. Now, that doesn't mean you can't grind out a bite or 2 or 3 somewhere in those windows, and on Lake Fork that's worth it because you never know how big the bite's going to be. But my point is, those quartering moons, when the moon's a quarter away from you as far as the overhead position, those are the lowest activity times. Overhead and underfoot is great. Now, with a full moon, it will be overhead at noon, and it will be underfoot, and I'm sorry, it'll be underfoot at noon, and it will be overhead at midnight on the day of the full moon. Now, if you look at that, that's important to know, because one of our peak staging periods is leading up to the full moon, the last few days leading up to the full moon. Well, on the last day before the full moon, okay, that peak activity hour is going to be close to the middle of the day when you're fishing. It's going to be from 10:30 to 12:30. That window in that 11 o'clock hour is going to be your peak activity hour while you're fishing that day. That's important to know. Your secondary activity level is going to be right at daylight, and your other secondary activity is going to be right at dusk or pretty close to it, around 5 o'clock in the evening. So you might not be fishing for that one or the morning one. You might only have the overhead, the underfoot full moon, maybe your only good feeding window outside of the low light conditions that are there every day when you're leading up to the full moon. So it's important to know what time that moon is overhead and underfoot. If I was fishing Lake Fork tomorrow, what would I target? Secondary points? No, actually, right now we had a new moon on Monday. So today's Wednesday, so tomorrow's 3 days removed from a new moon. So if you look at that and look at our little graph here, 1, 2, 3. Man, look, we're hitting the peak of the spawning. So I would actually be in the, we're 3 days after. 1, 2, 3. This is tomorrow. We're just hitting the peak of the spawning cycle for this new moon. So no, I would be focused on spawning fish tomorrow. And for the next few days, I would be strictly focused on spawning fish. Targeting spawning fish in the backs of pockets. I know tomorrow's Thursday, but the new moon was on Monday, not Sunday. Don't pay attention to the letters. I'm just paying attention to when the new moon was. 1, 2, 3. The new moon was on Monday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, tomorrow's Thursday. This is where we are tomorrow as far as the moon cycle goes. So yeah, so for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and maybe even Monday, I'm going to be looking at spawning fish. Then as we get into Tuesday, I'm going to start mixing it up. By the time we get to next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, man, I'm going to be strictly looking, I'm going to start to really look towards the end of next week and only fishing for staging fish. Hope that helps. Do the times change with the moon cycles on when it will be underfoot and overhead? If so, could you give examples? Yeah. So on a full moon, like I said, on a full moon, it'll be directly overhead at midnight, directly underfoot at noon. As you get the next day, it'll be overhead and underfoot just a little bit later. Just a little bit later. Just a little bit later each day. So Friday of this week will still be in that really good spawning cycle. There'll be some fish starting to go out to the staging deal, but in my opinion, there'll be more spawning. The other thing is now we've gone through a couple of cycles of spawning bass already, so there's post-spawn fish already out there. So the later you get into the year, there's already more post-spawn fish that are out there. So the staging bite becomes more prevalent later in the year, even when there's fish spawning, because there's already enough that have already come and gone there, done their thing. Now, when the Bassmaster tournament was here, like if this tournament would have been the week, but would have been like the 4 days before it was, man, it would have been like sight fishing galore, and those guys fishing staging fish would have had a harder time because we just hadn't had a lot of spawners yet at that time. So everything, as those fish were moving into spawn, that was pretty much what all of them were doing that were already pulled up. Now there were still some out that hadn't pulled up yet that are pulling in now. But, yeah. And there's always some of both, guys. So there's going to be guys that know what they're talking about, that are very good fishermen. They're going to watch this and go, psh, there's always fish on them staging points. Yeah, there is. And there's always fish spawning from March to May every year, and even June this year. But that doesn't mean that there's not days where the spawning fish are going to produce better than the staging fish, and vice versa. And I'm trying to figure out a way where I can hit both of those at their peaks, and this is my theory I've come up with. Zane Selvin says, staging fish are fun. 1 second in tournament on Bob Sandlin Sunday on points and windblown banks and 30-mile-an-hour wind gusts. Day before new moon and whacked them. Day before. Dude, I'm telling you, the day before the moon is the best staging bite there is. Over 30 in the boat. Awesome. Off topic, but how big is the tournament on Fork this weekend? The Legends is a pretty big tournament. It's pretty sizable. It's not one of the biggest ones, but it's bigger than most. For the rest of this video, I'll just answer questions. That pretty much wraps up what I was going to talk about, man. I hope that does help you guys in some way dial in some of these springtime movements of these bass. And I do appreciate all of you that have joined us so far tonight. I know we don't normally do lives on Wednesday, but with all the rain, the backwater will be dirty. Yeah, the backwaters, a lot of the backwaters are going to be dirty. A lot of the whole lake is going to be dirty, honestly, because of it rained real hard and dirty up the backwaters, and then I'm sure they've had to open up gates. And so that's going to pull all that dirty water down the lake. And so, yeah, the lake's going to have some stain to it, I'm sure, this week. And the other thing is, if we're in a spawning cycle like we're going to be this weekend and towards the end of this week, we're, like I said, we're right here, right now in the cycle. So for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we're really going to be in a peak spawning cycle over the weekend. With that being said, you can't necessarily sight fish for them when you got flooding water and dirty water and all that. But you still need to target spawning bass. Slow down and flip. Slow down. Slow down and target those spawning bass with light Texas rigs, weightless plastics. You can get them to react to swim jigs and frogs. A lot of that stuff if the junk is flooded like it should be this week. So still target those spawning bass. DJ Shack, Monticello has not reopened. The kayak guys are throwing their kayaks over the bridge and getting to fish it that way, but no, the park and the ramp and all that's closed with no signs of it ever reopening as of now. Jared Carson, we sure do need to get together on a new date. You're right, brother. Hanes or Free Loom? Hanes. I wear Hanes. I don't really have a reason why. I guess it's what my mama bought me back in the day and I ain't never changed. I don't really question a whole lot of things like that. I'm a function, not a form guy, if you know what I mean. All right. Has anybody got any more questions? I'll hang around for a little while and try to answer some questions for you guys if y'all have any. Football jig or casting jig? Well, that depends on what the application is. It depends on what you're doing. As far as like dragging offshore, I actually do use a different type of jig. I use the hybrid jig by 6 Sense Fishing, and it's got a kind of a beveled bottom to it like a football jig does, so it will rock when you drag it like a football jig, but it's a much more snag-free head coming through timber and shell and all the stuff that we have on Lake Fork that football jigs can be a little more prone to get hung up in. And that hybrid jig from 6 Sense does a good job of kind of doing all of the jobs. Seabach, you're very welcome. I appreciate y'all joining me. I appreciate every one of y'all took time to join us tonight. What is the best post-spawn bait to target bigger bites that can go from pond to lake docks and cover? What is the best post-spawn bait to target bigger bites that can go from pond to lake, docks, and cover? So you can just fish everything up shallow from a pond to a lake. I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, a swim jig and a frog. A swim jig and a frog are both very, very good post-spawn baits, and they do get big bites. How far behind is Northeast Oklahoma versus Lake Fork regarding the spawn? Man, I honestly have no way of knowing that without knowing at least like a water temperature on the body of water you're dealing with. Some of those lakes are going to be significantly behind because some of those lakes in Northeast Oklahoma are deep, kind of rocky, mountainous type lakes. And some of them are shallow water fisheries, and they're not going to be that far behind. I don't know. I'd have to have more knowledge of the lake you're talking about to be able to tell you that. Or to be able to guess at it anyway. There's really no way for me to know for sure. I'm actually headed out of town in the morning, man. I'm going to Ray Roberts the next few days. We're going to go check out Ray Roberts and try to do a little Bassmaster Classic. Does anybody realize the Bassmaster Classic is like less than a month away now? We're less than a month away from the Bassmaster Classic being in Texas at Lake Ray Roberts. LT grade, no doubt. Should we have a decent deep bite by the time we have Skeeter Owners Tournament this year? Yeah, there's some fish starting to get out there now. There are some, the first few are just starting to get out there now. There will be a somewhat of an offshore bite. There probably won't be near as many as, there just won't be as many fish on as many spots as there usually is. Best trailer for swim jig. I actually prefer to throw swim baits on swim jigs. I throw like the little Divine swim bait from 6 Sense Fishing. I throw that on a swim jig. I like throwing swim baits on swim jigs better than flapping baits. And I know a lot of guys do it differently. Is fork above full pull after the rain? Well, they'll level it out. Anytime fork gets about 6 inches above full pull, they open the gates and level it out. They usually open the gates and leave them open until it's 6 inches below full pull is usually what they do. Favorite rig / lure if you could only have one? Chatterbait. 3/8 ounce white chatterbait. If I could only pick one. Oh, what will this cold front do to the bite on Lake Fork? Not much. The cold is not going to affect them because it's not going to affect them. It's not cold enough. The water temps aren't going to really change. If the water temps don't really change, it's not really going to affect the bite as far as the cold. Now, the changing water levels, the changing water colors, that can present some challenges. May see me at Ray Bob. I'll be there the next 3 days. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'll be fishing Ray Bob. M. Allison, interesting theory tonight. Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Is Lake Fork lures pouring yet? I don't know. I haven't talked to Mr. Parker in quite a long time. I need to go by and see him. I didn't know they stopped pouring, honestly. Shame to say. Is there any particular swim jig you prefer for heavy grass? There's a 6 Sense makes a braid swim jig that's got a super heavy gauge hook, just a really stocky 4-wheel drive of a swim jig that's really good if you're fishing extremely heavy cover. Have I switched the trailer on the chatterbait to a regular swim bait? Yeah. I've gone from the live magic shad to a paddle tail bait on my chatterbait trailers. Yep, we're up around 70-degree water temps throughout the lake for the most part. Yep. Will the cold front send the fish deep? Some of the fish are already making their way out deep, but no, the cold front definitely ain't gonna send them deep. If anything, the cold front is going to slow them down from going deep, because what we need at this point to drive more fish deep is we need some heat to raise the water temps, push the spawning cycles along, and start driving some of those fish into deeper water as those water temps climb. So no, if anything, the cold front is going to not drive them deep. Brunei making an appearance tonight. What's up, big dog? See you. I guess you must have got back from West Texas, or maybe you're in West Texas and just not on the rig, so you're bored, and so you're watching me. Well, shoot, guys, I think we're going to start wrapping it up, man, and I'll keep answering questions as they come. But like I said earlier, I hope y'all enjoyed the theory that we put forth tonight. It's a work in progress for me, but I want to share that because that's kind of based on what we saw, especially like I said, what we saw with the Bassmaster Elite Series and the way that played out, and just the stuff that I've seen on the water year after year, being an adamant sight fisherman like I am. I really do believe that's how it goes, what we explained earlier in this video. So is the topwater bite still on fire? Man, you know, the bite overall with all the changing weather has gotten really inconsistent the last week or two. It's not as good as it was. But yes, as far as baits go, the topwater bite is about, it's one of the best things you can throw. The popper, the splashback poppers, and even the smaller like Yellow Magic quarter ounce poppers, those are really doing a lot of work right now as far as the bites that we're getting. We're having to work for them, though. It has gotten more inconsistent and a little bit tougher to come by bites here last week or two. And everybody I talked to has said the same thing. So, if you could choose one time of year for an Oklahoma angler to come to Fork, what would it be? Normally, I would say May. This year, probably June. But no, normally by the time we get to this time of year, it's like we call May the month of millions, because usually the spawn's starting to wrap up. But if you want to do spawning, you can still fish for spawning fish. But there's deep fish, there's shallow post spawn fish. You can catch them on frog, a swim jig, a swim bait, or chatterbait, weightless plastics, Texas rigs, go punch grass, catch them sight fishing. You can go deep cranking, grabbing a football jig, get your Carolina rig out. You can throw a big swim. Like, that's usually how May is out here. You can just catch them however you want to and catch numbers of them. This year, it's probably going to be more like June when all that goes down. So, Mosquito Owners Tournament ought to be really fun in the early part of June, like it always is. Will a popper work for bedding fish? Yes, especially in low light conditions. A popper will 100,000% work for bedding fish. I've caught a lot of bed fish that I saw the day before that weren't really like wanting to lock on and let me flip to them while I was looking at them. I go to them the next morning, first thing, throw a popper, work it real slow and gentle over the top and catch them. I've caught a lot of spawning fish like that. Awesome. Good stuff. Hey, man, thank you guys for joining us for a special live edition of the Guys Network. Like I said, I certainly hope you enjoyed it. I'm excited. It's something new for me to focus on, something new for me to try and become a better fisherman. And that's what I'm trying to do as I think through this process with everything that I've seen here lately and over the years combined. So hope it helps y'all, for real. That's the sincerest thing, is I really do hope it helps you guys zero in on your days out and that you get to catch some more and bigger fish doing it. That's what we're all about. Do me a favor, go check out our sponsors at 6centsfishing.com. If you order anything from there, like the swim jigs we talked about, or the Vega frogs, or just anything it's deep cranking season coming up. You better get you some big baits, some big cranking baits. But anything you order from there, be sure you use the code Your Lake Fork Guide. You'll get a 10% discount on all orders. If you're looking for eyewear, please check out waterlandco.com. Same code, Your Lake Fork Guide will give you the same 10% discount at waterlandco.com for what is, my opinion, the best eyewear in the fishing game, especially when it comes to the value. The price is amazing compared to some other stuff out there. So go check them out as well. Smash Tech Baits, Skeeter Boats, Nautical Mile Marine. Please support all the sponsors. And also the Fish Life app, guys. If you're fishing any of the lakes up around this region, we've got premium packages on all of them. Just about every single one of them. So any of those lakes you're fishing, you can download the Fish Life app for free. You can look and see what lakes we have. Find a lake that applies to you. You can subscribe to it. I guarantee you'll never find any more current or accurate information on any other fishing app out there. It's unbelievable the amount of success that people have had from catching personal best, double-digit fish, just unbelievable days with numbers. Kids using it for high school tournaments, winning scholarships. I mean, not that Lee definitely did not use the Fish Life app. But, by the way, Lee Island, that point, was featured on that app for 2 months in March and April. So it's the information that you receive on the Fish Life app is definitely better than anything else you're going to get out there in the fishing app world. Go check that out. If you're watching it after the fact, it will be linked in the description. And, yeah, I think I've done all the selling I need to do. Thank you guys very much for joining us once again. I will not be able to go live tomorrow night from Ray Roberts. But thank y'all for joining us once again, and we'll see you next time right here on Your Lake Fork Guide.